So I know you all have heard it. Maybe you've even said it. But what does men are trash really mean? And when does it go way too far? Okay. Today, I'm not here to defend men or attack women. I'm here to unpack the phrase men are trash, where it comes from, and why it's so powerful for some, and why it can completely shut down the conversation for other people. Okay. And let's be honest, if you're in a space like mine, you've seen this a lot on panels that discuss women and men's relationships. So let's talk about men, when women say men are trash, and let's talk about how we can make that make that feeling or translate that feeling, that sentiment, into a way where we can have a better dialogue about it and both get what we want from the situation. Okay. So, okay, you see this lady here on the side of the screen. Okay. And so I wanted to start this off with where this all began, because phrases like men are trash just don't appear out of anywhere. There's a history of this feeling. Okay. It's not a new thing. Okay. But back in 2019, a suffragette, which is a feminist before I believe the word feminist came about, right? A feminist pamphlet from 1918 went viral online with social media users claiming its words were very wise, okay? And that the words from this pamphlet in 1918 were just as relevant as they are today, okay? So, this 101-year-old pamphlet titled Advice on Marriage to Young Ladies shares sage advice, allegedly, for women considering marriage. And the internet thinks that this is hilarious for whatever reason. And I feel like this is the birth of clearly feminism, but it is the beginning, or it is the inception of where this men are trash comes from. Okay, this document, we're going to read it together. Okay, so let me go to the first one. Here we go. Okay, number one, do not marry at all. Okay. Do not marry at all. Number two, but if you must, avoid the beauty men, flirts and the bounders, tailors, dummies, and the football enthusiasts. So what is that? These jobs sound very blue collar. And so they're saying, but if you must have a man in your life, avoid the beauty men, I guess the men that get by on their looks, the flirts, the bounders, the tailor's dummies, right? So the tailor's assistants or apprentices, and football enthusiasts. Okay, let's go on to the next. Number three, look for a strong, tame man, a firelighter, a coal getter, a window cleaner, and a yard swiller. So basically, look for strong men that you can tame, that'll light your fire, that'll go get your coal, and that'll clean your freaking windows and mow your yard. Okay. Number four, don't expect too much. Most men are lazy, selfish, thoughtless, lying, drunken, clumsy, heavy footed, rough, unmanly brutes and need taming. Winston, come from over there. Winston, no, sir. Excuse me. So where are we now? Number 5. Or really, the point of this list, okay, is basically men are just bad, okay? But number 5, all bachelors are, and many are, worse still. So worse than numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? If you want the brute happy, this is number 6. If you want him happy, feed the brute, it reads. Number 7, let me scoot this up for y'all. Number 7, the same remark applies to dogs. So this pamphlet is comparing men to dogs and is saying that in order to make him happy, you just need to feed him. But in order for you to be happy, you need to pick one that is just all about, being tamed, being your firelighter, being your coal getter, your window cleaner, and your yard mower. Okay. And then number 8, you will be wiser not to chance it basically at all. It isn't worth the risk. It's like the audacity of these people to just sit around and think that they can just talk to men or talk about men this way, especially look at how long ago. Look at the times that they're living in. The streets are barely paved, and they're sitting around making little letters like this, talking about how young ladies need to avoid marriage or pick a man that's dumb enough to tame and that you can control. Totally egregious. But the whole remark of the same remark applies to dogs was really disheartening. And this here was signed off by a suffragette wife. So this is a feminist wife who's clearly unhappy in her marriage and is comparing her husband to nothing more than a dog. Okay? So, and when this went viral online back in 2019, a lot of people, of course, on Twitter, people were writing things like, in other words, don't get married, just get a dog. While other people said stuff like, I wish I'd seen this before I got married and then divorced. It's like not any accountability, and I wish I would have worked harder to keep my marriage and my family together. It's just really, really, really sad, And people pointed out, men users pointed out that, when you think that a lot has changed from this picture here, 100 years ago or 100 and however many years ago, women are still thinking and talking like this, right? But when we talk about, women's rights, we have to look at the way the entire country doled out rights to people, right? Like, so we all know how, and I'm just speaking of the United States, okay, guys? Like, I understand that most of you all are watching me from America, but also that I have people from India and England also watching me, people. Hello, everyone. But here in the States, right? The country announced its independence from Britain in 1776. Okay. And voting rights were based on property ownership. This typically meant that those people voting were going to be white men, and they were typically over the age of 21. And I wish I had my book on religion over here. It's downstairs in my little library. But the most of the men were Protestant in religion. Okay, they weren't Catholic, They weren't Muslim, they weren't Jewish, they were Protestant. This was 1776, okay? In 1787, in the newly drafted Constitution, states were given the power to set voting mandates, and most were still favorable to white males who owned property. So, what we're hearing here is not all men had the right to vote, not even in 1776 or 1787. Okay. It wasn't until 1830 where many states had dropped religion and property ownership as a requirement for voting. And with such a large percentage of the population at the polls, political parties were beginning to develop. So, independents, Democrats versus Republicans, all of this started up in 1830. Okay. And in 1868, the 14th Amendment began to or starts to recognize African Americans as citizens, giving them the right to vote. However, state officials continue to attempt to deny this right, even to this day in 2025. Okay. So from 1830, us here in America that are not white and not male, we have been able to participate in this voting aspect of our community. Okay. Women, no, but here we are. Many states dropped religion, they dropped property ownership, and now everybody is, or I'm sorry, in 1868, in 1868, they dropped the amendment, and African Americans as citizens were given the right to vote. Okay. Now, in 1870, African Americans were granted the right to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment. It prohibited any state or local government from denying that right. So even though in 1868, the 14th Amendment recognized African Americans as citizens and gave them the right to vote, people weren't really feeling that. And it wasn't until 1870 where they were like, look, y'all can't play around with this anymore. Y'all need to let these people vote. Okay. Now, that's 1870. In 1890, now where did we start? We started in 1776 with just white males who owned property and who were Protestant had the right to vote. Okay. Now we're in 1870, where African Americans were granted the right to vote with the passage of the 15th Amendment, which prohibited any state or local government from denying them their right to vote. Okay. So here we are now, 1890. Wyoming becomes the first state to recognize women's right to vote and provide it in its state's constitution. Wow. So here we go. We have the state of Wyoming. Shout out to Kanye West. Okay. Very progressive, isn't he, out there in the state of Wyoming? But Wyoming becomes the first state to recognize women's rights to vote, and it provides it in its state's constitution. Wow. And some few years later, in 1913, voting power is expanded with the 17th Amendment, calling for the popular election of U.S. senators. Okay. So even after all of that, right, the women, they're like, we want to vote, we want to vote, we want to vote, right? And yes, they are given the right to vote. But did men always have the right to vote, and weren't men oppressed as well? Like, are we just going to say that, are we just going to call all men the big bad wolf and say that all of them are bad? I don't get when women do that. Like, all men are not bad, all men are not trash. Okay, there was a lot going on in the country, and as people learned to do better, they did or attempted to do so, or they were made to do so by the communities, of who, if you're going to have us pay taxes, if you're going to have us on the hook for all of these things, then we need to have the right to vote. So they could no longer uphold only men that paid taxes and owned property and that were Protestant. They had to open up for everyone. So everyone had to fight for what they have today. All right. So the problem, words don't just live, like, when you say something, it matters to the person you're saying it to, and it lives in the ears of the listener. So, when this thing went viral with this lady, the suffragette movement material gaining traction in 2019, there was a viral thread where a woman shared stories of being harassed on her commute to work. And she used the phrase "men are trash" to make her point, and she got thousands of supportive comments, but she also got thousands of angry replies from men who felt ostracized and attacked by her. You know, and here's like where we hit a wall. When some men hear "men are trash," they don't hear "this behavior is hurting me." They hear "you suck, you are harmful, you personally, you are the enemy, you, him, whoever is reading it, right? Not the person that is doing the cat calling. If she would have said, "Cat calling is trash, cat calling women who are already afraid on a busy street late at night, catcalling is harmful behavior that personally scares me as a woman." All right. You didn't do that. The lady didn't do that. She just said all men are trash. That means my grandpa, my brother, my husband, my son, all men are trash. Right. And that's the danger of turning deep pain into a slogan. When women get online and get on these panels and say these really weird stinging talking points about how men are trash, it's a blunt tool. Your mouth is becomes a blunt tool that causes damage, and it doesn't make anything better. It actually does the opposite of what you're wanting. You want the cat calling to stop, but you increase the abuse because you've further added fuel to the fire, right? So the real impact on men and women is like you're being lumped into a group that you don't identify with. Just like I don't identify with, you know, toots or babies' mothers. Men, not all men are out here catcalling women, being disrespectful to women. Okay. So you become part of the problem when you start talking like that at men. So before you even open your mouth, you've already shut down the conversation when you join a panel that has such a hardcore title like "men are trash." Like, men, when they read that, they're already seeing red, they're already shutting down their ears, they don't want to hear what you have to say. And for women, y'all feel empowered by it, like finally saying it out loud. When you've been whispering it to yourself for years, it probably feels really empowering. Okay, but you can use these phrases and it can backfire on you. And I was reading about a girl in Australia who had basically wrote the tagline "men are trash" in one of the articles that she had written. And even though her research and her article had been well researched and written, people weren't compassionate for her, and they ripped her to shreds, and it completely made everybody forget what the fuck her message was all about. okay? Because she put that word string in there, men are trash, which is like not cool. Not cool at all. Okay. So your words have a real impact on others, and when you use words like that, you're not bridging the gap, you're further dividing male and females. Okay. I'm sorry if you guys hear my dog acting a fool in the background. It's like every time I'm recording or he hears me turn on this microphone, he just starts acting a fool. So please forgive me if you hear him in the background. Okay. Anyway, like I was saying, we want to bridge the gap. So how do we do that? One way to bridge the gap is to do what I said just a couple of minutes ago. Instead of saying all men are trash, why don't you just call out the behavior that you don't like? When my son was 3 years old, I would impress upon him that you need to wash your hands when you leave the bathroom. Instead of saying you're trash for not washing your hands, I would just lead him back into the bathroom and say, Bubba, let's wash your hands. We must wash your hands so that we are clean and don't spread germs, right? If the lady didn't want to be catcalled, instead of calling all men trash, she should have said something like, being catcalled makes me feel terrified for my life, and makes me also feel like trash, or something like that, along that line, like when you hear X, Y, and Z on the street, it although you all feel like it is flattering for a woman who is insecure, or a woman who is alone on a street in a foreign place, this can be scary or frightful. Something like that. I don't know. I don't feel this way. I just feel like it's kind of normal to be catcalled. The guys are working. It's a beautiful woman outside. It's a nice distraction. That's how I take it. But yeah, you instead of getting on these panels and degrading each other's mental health, like, why don't we really try to talk to each other the way that we would talk to our children when we were bringing them up? Like, a lot of us need to re teach ourselves because we weren't properly taught as children, and I get that. I get that. But it gets annoying when you guys get up here on these panels and have these talking points, and you guys don't really even know where these talking points come from, you know? And why you didn't have the right to vote, and what that meant for other men around you who also didn't have the right to vote because they weren't wealthy, they didn't, and I mean wealthy, they didn't pay taxes, they didn't own property. So you and a man who didn't pay taxes and didn't own property, y'all were in the same boat. And even though there was a gap in time where they had the right to vote and you didn't, what did you suffer? You know? Was it a life-changing event like, the Holocaust or slavery? Because that's how a lot of you women act. A lot of you women act as if you all were all slaves, and, let's be honest. You know, white women weren't enslaved. They were the enslavers, you know? You didn't have the right to vote, but you had the right to own a slave. So when a lot of you women are like, "We didn't have the right to vote. We didn't have the right to vote." Yeah, but those women that didn't have the right to vote when you were a slave, you're talking as if you and them have the same dichotomy in life. Mm, I don't know. It's it's a conundrum. Like, I'm just trying to figure out all this red pill, all this blue pill, all this black pill, why people call me a pick me, why people are so mad at me sometimes when I get on these panels and try to drag me for filth, when I'm just trying to advocate for people in my life that I love that happen to be male. Again, my dad, my brother, my husband, my son. So here's the takeaway: men are trash is a phrase born from real hurt and real injustice. At its best, it shines light on systematic problems. At its worst, it can make people shut their ears and just walk away from these panels to begin with, because I actually think that the panels are a sign that men actually don't want to walk away, but that they are on the very end of seeing any purpose in women at all. Like, so it's like we could turn this around, ladies. We could turn this around, but if we keep this up, we are about to push them off of the edge and they're never going to come back, you know? So if we want change, we have to call out what is harmful. Calling men trash is harmful, okay? But we must also we like when we if we are replacing the phrase men are trash, we have to also invite people to feel comfortable saying what they have a problem with, like pointing out the cat calling. I think many, if you just stick to what the problem is and not, you know, uh, and not try to catastrophize or size an event. If you don't do that, if you don't make a catastrophe out of being catcalled and you just call out the improper behavior, you'll have more luck. The goal isn't to win the fight. The goal is to change the culture of catcalling. The culture of calling women bitches, or the culture of whatever you think oppresses you as a woman. If we just stick to the behavior that's harmful, I feel like we could have a better dialogue with the men and start to change and turn this stuff around. So I'll leave you with this. When you hear men are trash, do you hear an attack? Do you hear a cry for help? And more importantly, how will you respond to the phrase men are trash? Because I know that when I hear men are trash, from especially from a young woman or a man that consider himself a feminist, I'm gonna have to assume that you were very poorly treated by a man in your past, and that you are just operating from a space of hurt, and that you have some therapy to seek. That's my take on it, Rosebuds. I'd love to hear your take on it down in the comments. I'm going to leave you all with this little clip that kind of shows, women in the 2020s acting as if they are the woman in this here picture. Okay. Votes for women. This is back when women couldn't vote at all, right? Um, and this little clip that I'm about to close out with is going to show you all women in the 2020s acting as if they are as oppressed, if at all, as the women from before 1918. Because this is allegedly when this photo was taken. 1918. You're about to hear women in the 2020s speak as if it is 1918. Go figure.
Because you're on the show with the cocktails with the queens. And there's a reason for that. It wasn't to have you defend or not defend Donald Trump. It was about, I care about what's in this contract with Black America for women. And it's not, we're not mentioned at all in the contract with Black America. And I
You are
want to know
mentioned. I mean, when you mention Black people, you mentioning Black women. So don't
Oh,
count yourself out.
no,
Yes,
that's
you
not
are.
true.
that's like administration said that when they
Black
mention
people is not
minorities,
Black
they
women.
That's
mention
not
Black
true.
women are not included in Black people.
No,
Come on,
it's
ladies.
not. But that's like, you know, that's like you saying, that's like when the president says minorities, then he's including Black people. But we all know that that's not the case. Black women have specific needs that are not also being met. And we also feel that there should be some things that are specific to us and our plight as well. And
I understand that.
I feel like as a Black man, you can lead.
No,
I feel like
well,
you can.
I just offered y'all to write a section up for it. I just said I don't mind if you guys help us. If you guys help us write a section. No, I've been open to all kind of experts in putting this together. It wasn't just me. We dealt with experts in all fields of this contract with Black America. So we
When I was reading this, when I was reading about the suffragettes and how basically these feminist women back in the day, they were advising young women about marriage, and then I came across these 8 pieces of advice. It made me think of this incident with Ice Cube, Vivica Fox, and all of them. I mean, just hearing, you know, I could hear them in my head cackling at him, and it was like you can see him shutting down and saying, like, "You all can help and contribute. I'm saying that I'm asking for your help." And he's still trying to be productive. And in that, you see Vivica Fox, like, really, you know. And it's like, if you care, then you should contribute. So if you care enough to think or say men are trash, then you should contribute to helping them become better. Or not being trash yourself.